much for joining us this morning. I'm Heather Belmont. I'm the college-wide Dean for Science here at Miami-Dade College, and I am extraordinarily pleased to have an opportunity to introduce our authors. But I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors of the Miami International Book Fair, John and James L. Knight Foundation, OHL, Irenial, American Airlines, as well as so many others that are listed on our signage throughout the fair. Miami Book Fair is part of the Center for Writing and Literature at Miami-Dade College. We are grateful to the college and the hundreds of other volunteers that make this fair possible each and every year. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers after our reading and discussion with our authors. And there'll also be an opportunity for autographing after our session with the authors. The authors will be available at the bottom of the escalator to your left-hand side. There's a table outside, and they'll be available there. And so, with that, I'd like to introduce Nicholson Baker, who probably needs no introduction, who is the author of 10 novels and 5 works of fiction, including Human Smoke and Double Fold, which was the winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award. Baker's unforgettable poet protagonist, Paul Chowder, is back in the Paul Chowder Chronicles. Chowder's enthusiasm for poetry and songwriting frame a love story about 2 people rediscovering each other. Countless listeners depend on the book reviews from Alan Cheuse, America's voice of books on NPR. And many of those listeners also follow his own critically acclaimed fiction and nonfiction books. Cheuse is the author of 5 novels, 4 collections of short fiction, the memoir, Fall Out of Heaven, and A Trance After Breakfast, a collection of travel essays. In An Authentic Captain Marvel Ring and Other Stories, his very best short stories and novellas are brought together in a quintessential collection. I bring to you Nicholson Baker and Alan Cheuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Can we bring up, there we go. Thank you, Heather. An additional sponsorship, this event is brought to you by 2 white beards. Thanks for stopping by this morning. We're going to talk about writing, about fiction, nonfiction perhaps too, love, music, poetry, and fucking, which seems, all of those subjects, an integral part of the work of the man you see seated here on stage with me. I first encountered his work in the Mezzanine, which is about the shortest trip of any adventurer, wanderer, wayfarer in Western literature. It starts at the bottom of an escalator and gets to the top, and it contains within that scope every aspect of modern human consciousness and awareness of life and love and many other subjects. It was an extraordinary early work, and Baker has gone on to, can I call you Nick? Yeah. Yeah, Nick. We've never met before, honestly, officer. Has gone on to produce one of the most interesting and idiosyncratic and in its own way, one of the broadest collections of fiction in particular that you'll find by any living American writer. All of those subjects that I mentioned and a lot more come up in the work. But let me start on I think it's a low note. It was an interview with Stephen Colbert that Nick underwent not too long ago. And it looked like a meeting between 2 different interstellar species. I mean, two of the most gifted and comic intellects in America today, and he stymied Colbert. Colbert asked him a question, he answered the question, and Colbert was utterly speechless twice in the interview, and that was the interview. Nick said one thing, and Colbert, I mean, he's obviously a great comedian. He had tremendous on-stage alacrity. So Nick said something, and Colbert sat there and looked at him and looked at him and looked at him, and then asked another question. Same thing happened. I mean, Colbert could not speak to him or with him. It was extraordinary. I urge you to watch it on YouTube. What was that like for you?
Well, it was it was not like this. This is fun and friendly and happy. That was traumatic and miserable because there's in the green room there's a kind of a display of cheeses and there's this sort of ramping up to the moment where you're going to go out to meet. And I really think that Colbert is a kind of strange genius. I think he's brilliant. And so I really admired him, and there was actually a moment, a sort of a ritualistic moment where I said, "You are the funniest person in creation," and he said, "Thank you," and then I was let out, and I think the reason that he was quiet after I said things was basically because what I said wasn't very interesting. It wasn't very funny. It didn't take things further. I just didn't know how to deal with this. I'm not a public person. Mm-hmm. I like to say wild, scandalous, crazy things on the page, but that doesn't mean that I am a person who wants to do that. And I certainly don't want to answer questions. He wanted to know about my, pubic hair. I mean, really, honestly, why did he want to know about that? I didn't want to tell him about that. I said, Stephen, that's a very intimate question. And where was he going to go with that? So yeah, it was maybe not the best conversation, but considering that it would happen on national television, I figured it's okay. It happens. These things happen. You're a writer. And you're asked to do things, and you do them, and then you go on to the next thing.
Yeah, it was clearly indicative of the fact that television is the complete opposite of serious linguistic art. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm terribly jealous of people who are good on television. I mean, I remember Gore Vidal back in the day was really good on TV.
Yes.
There are a bunch of other people who just can do it all. And there are other people who choose not to do any of it, like Thomas Pynchon, let's say. And then there are people like me who think, I want to be a sportsman-like human being. I want to do what people think that I ought to do, and so I do it. And I did do it. Yeah. And I really still think it was, I guess because it was so worrying and stressful, and in the end, painless, really. Well, carefully edited down. I mean, they talk to you for maybe 12 minutes, and then they cut out things, and they sort of squash it together in a strange, jumpy way. So I was happy to have done it. I'm honored to be part of, the Colbert Report. Why not?
I've heard worse statements from people who are tortured by the Gestapo.
Come on, what are you saying?
What about?
It was painless.
What about? It was very painful to watch. What about? Let's talk about Paul Chowder. I mean, did you have in mind the invention of a certain kind of American personality who we could follow through the course of his adult life for more than the time it takes to ride an escalator from the one floor to the other? When you first started out, or did he just grow with you and on you as you started writing about it?
Well, the first book, the Paul Chowder Chronicles, is just a fancy name for two different books that have the same guy as the main character, Paul Chowder.
The Anthologist.
And the first book grew in a kind of strange way. I wanted to explain some complexities of poetic meter. And I felt I had a theory. I thought that iambic pentameter was misnamed. If you say something like, all human things are subject to decay, and when fate summons, monarchs must obey, or true wit is nature to advantage dressed, what oft was thought but ne'er so well expressed. You know, I'm holding up 5 fingers, so you think, well, it's iambic, pentameter, 5. But if you actually think to yourself what you're doing, there's a secret 6th beat. All human things are subject to decay, and when paid, some its monarchs must obey. Boom. True wit is nature. So I thought, well, I have something. I have a novel. I have a novel about poetic meter, and I also had my own. I guess I was 50 at the time. I had my own troubles and unhappinesses, and I had been struggling with writing an introduction to a book that my wife and I were doing of photographs of old newspapers. I was supposed to write the introduction, and I didn't write it, and I was disappointing her, and I felt I was, in a sense, that she was losing her love for me, you know, because I couldn't finish the book. Not that I was blocked, because I don't believe in that word, writer's block. It implies that you have lots to say, but it's just that there's a granite boulder that's impeding you. Well, what if it is that just that you don't have a lot to say? You know, that's probably true. So I wrote the book about, I invented a person who was like me, but who wasn't happily married, who was living pretty much in the same place I lived, and who had these theories. I learned to write by reading poetry, so I felt that I had a huge debt to repay. So the book is really about what poetry, how poetry works, and how we think about it, and how it can help you make sense of life.
Could you read the opening just so people can hear, if they don't already know it?
Let me tell you about this paperback. This is a collector's edition because when the second of the Paul Chowder books came out, called Traveling Sprinkler, they rushed out some paperbacks of the Anthologist, but they forgot to put the title on the front of the book. So you see that blank space? That's where the word "The Anthologist" is supposed to be. So this is an incredibly unusual pressing. It's like those old coins that were sort of slightly mashed or squashed. And let me see what I can read here. It's hard to hold it all in your, this is the beginning of chapter 2, all in your head, all the different possible ways that you can enjoy life or not enjoy life, and all the things that are going on, the different rug patterns, the different car designs, the different radio shows that are coming and going, the new ads, the new crop of famous people. And then there is, of course, always and inevitably, this spume of poetry that's just blowing out of the sulfurous flue holes of the earth. Just masses of poetry. It's unstoppable. It's uncorkable. There's no way to make it end. If we could just stop. If everybody could stop publishing their poems. No more. Stop it. Just everyone, every poet, just stop. But of course, that's totally unfair to the poets who are just starting out. This may be their Wunderjahr. This may be the year that they really find their voice, and I'm telling them to stop? No, that wouldn't do. But wouldn't it be great to have a moment to regroup and understand? Everybody would ask, okie doke, what new poems am I going to read today? Sorry, none. There are no new poems. And so you're thrown back onto what's already there, and you look at what's on your own shelves that you bought maybe 8 years ago, and you think, have I really looked at this book? This book might have something to it. And it's there. It's been waiting and waiting without any demonstration or clamor, no squeaky wheel. It's just been waiting. If everybody was silent for a year, if we could just stop this endless forward stumbling progress, would we all be better people? I think probably so. I think that the lack of poetry, the absence of poetry, the yearning to have something new would be the best thing that could happen to our art. No poems for a solid year. Maybe 2. So that's one little bit. Thank you.
That's one of the great things about events like this is you will now hear his voice as you read the book, and that's really rather wonderful to have in your head. But you couldn't hear the voice if he hadn't written it that way. So be mindful of this is a trick you mustn't try at home. This is, well, how difficult is composition for you? How many pages a day do you produce?
Well, this book was unusual in that I set up a video camera, and I thought to myself, I want to explain why I still like poetry, why I actually love poetry. And I set up a video camera, and I set it up all over the house and sometimes out in the yard. And I had a white plastic chair that I moved around with me, and I sat on the chair in various angles, and I tried to look good, but I didn't look good. And I grew an enormous beard at the time because I thought, I'm being a poet, you know. And I had a poet's hat, which I thought, I bought it at Target, but it looked like a poet's hat. And
what does a poet's hat look like?
Well, it was, it looked kind of like a Quaker hat. It had a wire rim, but so it could kind of get twisty. Mm-hmm. But it was just a flat thing with a brim. And I still have it. It's sort of sun-bleached. I carry it around in the car with me. But I sat up I sat in front of these various settings with a video camera, and I just talked about what I had to say. So in a way, it was very easy to write the book. But the problem was there was a lot of repetition. So I would explain. For instance, that section that I just read, I spoke sitting on the front stairway in our house with the camera, so it was I had the stairway and the window above, and I just said it sitting on the stairway. What if we could just stop? And then I transcribed it, which is a lot of work, and cleaned it up a tiny bit, you know, shortened it. There's some repetition, and made it chapter 2. So in a sense, it was a very spoken book. Unusually spoken, because most of my books are very written, and I write and rewrite. But this one, I wanted it to be more like somebody telling you what is honestly true and cutting through all the stuff that is not true and just saying it.
That's the most bizarre method of composition I've ever heard of. But it's extraordinary that you made something quite readable.
Well, I don't know. Was it? You probably know better than. Aren't there other writers who, like Robert Heinlein, for instance? Didn't he dictate? There were some writers who talk into a tape recorder, right?
Yeah, very few of them though.
But I mean, the thing that I think is important is that if you turn on a tape recorder or a video camera, you are simulating this experience that we're having right now, which is that you're feeling that it's a little bit high stakes, that there can be mistakes, that you have to start and continue. There's no net. You can embarrass yourself, all that stuff. That feeling of pressure is very helpful.
But you know, it's hard to believe that the Colbert interview went so badly when you've been rehearsing without knowing it.
Alan, I didn't think it went as badly as it could have gone. I mean,
sorry,
seriously.
I won't harp on it anymore. You can all call it up on YouTube now.
You can make your own decision. He asked me about stuff that was intimate. So what? I mean, he talked about the twigs and berries. How are the twigs and berries? The twigs and berries, meaning down below. And I didn't answer.
Yeah,
that's
that
what
was really bizarre. It'd be like me asking you about your pubic hair.
But I don't mind. I mean, anything that somebody wants to ask, it just seems to me that he was trying to do something exciting and new, and I didn't give him what he needed. Yeah. And that doesn't matter because that's not my job. Yeah. My job is to, do something.
I once heard a story. A friend of mine was at dinner with James Dickey, and he turned to her and said, out of the blue, "My dear, what color is your pubic hair?" I mean, so this is the second time I've heard that somebody asked that question. Let's move on to art again.
I thought my pubic hair looked pretty good, but I didn't want to say that to him because I never actually thought about it. I don't give any thought to it. I was just completely dumbfounded.
Yeah, well, that was my point.
Let's move on.
Yeah, let's go to music. Can we go to music? In Traveling Sprinkler, where Paul Chowder demonstrates a knowledge of music that's as extensive and interesting and valuable to read about as his knowledge of poetry is in the first book. Can you read a little from the music, one of the music pages? This is completely unrehearsed, so he's got to take a moment to find it. So talk amongst yourselves. Or
he's got the pages folded down here. Let me just tell you what this book is about. A guy, the same guy, but this time he wants to write a protest song or a love song, and he started to go to Quaker meeting, which is something that I started to do. I'm not a religious person, really. My mother's family was Quaker, but I just can't possibly believe in a personal God. But my wife and my daughter went to Dover Friends meeting in Dover, New Hampshire, which is near where I lived, and they came back with this report that it was an incredible experience, and so I started to go. And it's totally silent and unscripted, and people just stand up and say things. There's something that happens when you are kept from speaking that I found really useful. The feeling of expectant silence I liked a lot. So this book is partly about the fact that the Quakers have a good long history of being, pacifist kind of people. They were opposed to slavery before anyone else. They were on the right side of a lot of things that one believes in now and didn't believe in then. And so I guess I couldn't have written the book without going to Quaker meeting, although I felt sort of like an imposter. I don't know, these pages that you've folded down. One thing I wanted to do at some point, I was toying with the idea of having a podcast. And so there's sort of a podcasty element to this. How do you do? I'm officially a resident of the United States of America. Millions of other people live in this country with me, and I don't know their names. I have a lot of words in my head, bits of pop music, phrases, names of places, and scraps of poetry and prose. Tough stuff, rough trade, party hardy, cheese whiz, telefunken, Matisyahu, Snosko Borowski, misty moisty, serious moonlight, mud jug. Do you know what a mud jug is? I found out what a mud jug is because I needed a new drug to write this book. And I thought that the drug that I needed was tobacco. All right, I know. But so I started by trying to write, I tried to smoke a pipe, which my grandfather smoked a pipe, and he died of throat cancer. So anyway, I had a bad experience with that. And then I bought those round, what are they called? Those round things you get at convenience stores that you stuff in your cheek.
Snuff.
Yeah, the plug of, so I would stuff a plug of chewing tobacco in my mouth. I stuffed a gigantic wad of it. I watched a whole bunch of videos about this, and apparently you need a mud jug, which is a thing that holds the spit that you spit out.
Yeah, my second wife taught at the University of Tennessee, and she banned chewing among her students because every once in a while she'd be talking about Wordsworth, and they'd go.
Yeah. So there's a tremendous amount of saliva involved, and so I put this stuff in my mouth, and I didn't do it right, and there was a huge amount of saliva, and some of it was coming out, but unfortunately some of it was going down. And if it goes down, you get an incredible, strange, tingly feeling all over your body, especially in your fingertips. And then you end up on the grass saying, why am I alive? So I tried that. And then I ended up smoking cigars. And that was a revelation. And I wrote this whole book in the car. Traveling Sprinkler, by the way, is the name of a garden device that travels around your garden. But sitting in my car, smoking Fausto cigars. And I would recommend, I mean, you don't inhale, but you just, a Fausto has a perfect name. It's a very strong cigar, and it helps you write enormously, at least for the first year. And then it kind of wears off. Now it does nothing for me.
There's going to be a run on Fausto cigars.
I am not affiliated in any way, but it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. They smell nasty. They taste horrible. When I went to Quaker meeting after smoking a cigar in the car, people would move away from me. So it wasn't a good thing. It's not a good thing at all. But
You smell quite nice this morning.
I'm fine this morning because I'm off. I'm clean. I'm sober. But it was really, I think that every book that you write, every book that I write, I try to write in a different way. So I wrote a book in which I got up very early in the morning. I got up at something like 4:35 in the morning and made a fire. And each chapter of the book was a match. It was called A Box of Matches. And Alan, you liked the book, and thank you. I was so happy you liked the book. I think you liked the book.
Yes, I did, yeah.
There was another book you didn't like, and that I understand completely because I don't like it either. But this book I lit, and it had 33 chapters because in A Box of Matches there's usually 32 matches, but sometimes they stick in an extra match, a bonus match. So each book I try to write in a different way. So a book in a car, a book getting up in the morning. I wrote a book at the kitchen table because I think, you need to mix it up a little bit. You need to have a different place, a different outlook on life.
Well, someone has written, talk a little bit about you and I, and then I'll go on and talk about B and me. Go on.
Sure. Okay, well, so I wrote, so the third book I wrote, I've written a book about riding an escalator, travel book, starting at the bottom, going to the top. Second book about giving a bottle to a baby, and I blew a puff of air in chapter 1 that reached a mobile across the room in chapter 7. So very slowing down time. Then the third book was about all my thoughts, all my working knowledge of John Updike, who was a guy who was kind of the king. He was the king. He was the man. He was the person who was at the top of the heap as a literary man of letters kind of person. And I thought a lot about him. And I decided to write the book without actually rereading any Updike, just using only the little scraps and bits of knowledge that I had of Updike in my head. So I wrote this book called You, capital U and I, about Updike. That was my third book. It came out in 1991, and there you have it. And it was probably the best book I wrote. And you wanted to talk about?
Well, that's nonfiction, yeah. Or would you call that fiction, you and I?
No, that was really, I tried to, and everything in that book is as true as I can possibly make it. Yeah, no, it's nonfiction.
But now
it's a memoir. It's the beginning of my. I mean, it's trying to. I thought of it as memory criticism or something. But what is the working knowledge we have of a writer when we don't actually prepare ourselves? Everybody here has a writer you really like, and you have little pieces, memories, fragments, little mica glittering shapes in your mind of good things that they've written. And what if you had to write a book of nonfiction today about that person, what would you say? That was my assignment.
But don't try that because a writer named James Holman has just done it. It's called B and Me, modeled on You and I, and he's about to publish it in March. it purports to be all about Nick Baker, but it gets bogged down in descriptions of sex with his girlfriend and classrooms where he picks out students that he's going to use as masturbatory images when he goes home that night. And he presumes that the students are going to do the same with him. If you met him, you might think twice about that, but as I have. But in any case, it's a wide and wonderful world, and people make a lot of different choices. But he didn't end up really writing about you. He ended up writing about himself. You wrote as much about Updike as you did about yourself. The quotient, the Baker quotient in his book was very low. But let's segue to, anyway, you might be interested in buying the book and think back about Nick's presence here, and you'll see that he's not really present in that book in the way that he's present here on stage, or certainly in his own work. But let's segue to the question about writing about sex. You know, there's a current bad sex writing contest that's going on, and people have, over the years, collected volumes of bad passages about sex by usually greatly skilled writers. I mean, it's not an obsession of yours, but it's a subject that you take up, as you have in the course of a couple of books. Phone sex, for one, or that fantasy novel that you wrote about stopping time and being able to minister to the character's own particular sexual peculiarities while his certain women in the novel are caught in a still frame of time.
Well, so
what
once
color,
I'd written
what
about
color is your what color is your pubic hair? Oh,
once I'd written about John Updike, what's next? So this was the early 90s, and I had always liked actually writing, kind of slightly racy sex scenes, and the three books that I'd written had no, I think almost no sex in them at all. By then, we had a daughter. I don't know, I felt it was time to write something. I wanted to write a love story, and I wanted it to be a truer kind of love story that had different kinds of obstacles in it. So I came up with this idea of a phone sex conversation, and the first line of the book is, "What are you wearing?" Which is, I mean, I think it's the only contribution I've made to the language, because now every time they refer to phone sex, they always say, "What are you wearing?" That's because it came from me. I did that. And that is, when I die, that will be lingering in my mind that I did that. And so I wrote the book in which the characters talk, and they have to become real and tell each other stories, and they have to try to be true to each other, or even though they can't see each other. So that was the first book, Vox, and that it sold a lot of copies, and we moved to Berkeley. What can I tell you? It was a great thing. I remember when the book started to sell, my wife and daughter went to the store and got fake $100 bills and spread them all over the dining room table in this sort of weird arrangement. And I came in, and it was just money. Back then, you could make money as a writer. And we moved to Berkeley, and then I did write the second book, the Fermata, which is also sexual, which is about this guy who can, sort of my adolescent fantasy. If you could stop the universe, what would you do? And everybody I asked who was male said I would take people's clothes off. And that was true of me at age 14, certainly. I would want to take people's clothes off. So I wrote a book about that. And it wasn't as successful, oddly enough. And then I stopped writing sex books altogether. I wrote a book about the history of libraries, a book of essays, a book about the Second World War, a couple of novels, and...
Let's conclude on a downer and talk about death and
Death.
Your book, Human Smoke. It's a controversial book. I mean, it's the one book of yours that has caused a lot of stir outside of the general stream of readers of fiction.
Well, so
were you surprised when it became so controversial?
I was a little surprised. I mean, of course, every book that I write, I think, oh God, as I'm writing, I think I'm going to get in trouble in some way for this book. But this one, I started to write the book about the lead up to the Second World War, and it stops in 1941. I started to write it, and I had my own voice in it. And my wife read it and said, "Take yourself out. This is too huge. It's too sad. Just use the voices of other people." And the voices that I'd used, I'd first discovered because I was in charge of a large newspaper library that was connected with a book about libraries. And I was reading things in newspapers, and I realized that there were a lot of surprises there. On the front page of the New York Herald Tribune for 1939, there's a surprise there. So the book is about what we and they, the enemy, knew at a given time in this beginning of the worst period of human history, really. And it stops in the end of 1941, and it's where you're sort of standing on a cliff and looking out at the 1942 was the year of the Holocaust, and what led up to that? What were the things that led up to it? And I just told it as a series of fragments, of pieces, of voices from diaries and from newspaper articles and from anything. I confine myself to published sources because sometimes people sometimes there's controversy about unpublished sources. So I thought, just keep it to public sources. And what I did actually to write that book, I had about 100 books in the back seat of my car, and I drove around and I would kind of pull one forward and then I would read a book and think, what do I actually care about? What do I remember from that book? And then I arranged it in chronological order and told the story of the beginnings of the Second World War in a way that helped me because I'm not a historian, and so I was just, in a way, trying to teach myself what happened. And some people got it, and some people didn't.
I think we might have time for 2 or 3 questions. Yes, sir. Can you stand and speak out, please? Right.
Topics, be they interviews with authors, things like this, etc. Brian Land used to do book notes on Sunday night, which for me, a long guy, if it was the right subject, could be fascinating. I find him to be a good interviewer, as I try and do. My question is, do either of you, or both, have an opinion on whether there's an appetite for something of that nature regarding fiction today?
Nick, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I want to just say one thing quickly is that I don't think that television and books are at some kind of antipodes. I have had experiences watching, this is fictional TV, or in which The Good Wife, for instance, is like a novel. It's a fantastic, artful, chaotic, beautiful thing.
Yeah, but I think we're making a distinction between, that uses a television monitor, but you were talking about live
But
TV.
I just want to
Yeah.
I don't want to leave any lingering idea that I have some feeling that television is bad and books are good. Television is fantastic, and I grew up on it, and I watched a ton of it, and I did no work in high school, and so I'm just saying that I believe in TV emphatically. However, so is there a place for a talking about fiction on TV? Of course.
And in effect, something to replicate this, where a quote-unquote good interviewer, let's say you, Al, once a week for an hour,
Yeah.
has
Sure.
Baker, DeLillo, Dennis Johnson, and Enright,
Yeah. The French do it very well, apparently. Just one little plug. TV, the novelistic cable shows. My daughter-in-law, Cara Seymour, plays Sister Harriet in The Nick, in case any of you have seen that, the nun who commits abortions. So we were all in favor of that form of TV in our household. But it's who would have imagined 20 years ago that those kinds of shows would have become possible piped into our homes. They're very novelistic, as you say, and really important to the course of our lives over the week. Yes, ma'am.
I came here after the previous session where you were in, partly because I didn't know you, and I liked some of the things you said, and something brought me here.
Thank you.
I also checked on you last night, Googled you, and I found out that you went to Haverford, which is a Quaker-based education, a good liberal arts education. I am an unusual person as a writer because I took ancient Greek, I took Latin, I had a real classic education. And I find now that I'm writing my own novel, some of my classic education is coming back into my head. You mentioned Homer, I think, just a while before. What did you get from Haverford, from your early education, in terms of literature, literary breadth, perhaps? Quirky, I looked at this and I said, oh, he got the idea of Tristan Sandy, I think, who did the book twice. What did you get from that education, and also the Quakerism? Did you feel some of that in Haverford as well?
So that's a wonderful question, and I wrote. Well, I went to Haverford because it's a very embarrassing kind of thing. I did not know that my own grandfather had gone to Haverford for a year, and then he transferred somewhere else. But I just read Frank Conroy's Stop Time, which is an autobiographical kind of somewhat fictionalized, I guess, memoir. And he ends up getting off the train at Haverford, Pennsylvania, and walking to this college. And it was such a beautiful moment where he gets off. He's been in Paris and he's done all kinds of crazy things, and he ends up at this college. And I was a bassoon at that point. I had graduated from college early, and I went to the Eastman School of Music for a year. I was a bassoon major. I wanted to be a composer. Realized I had no talent, and instead wanted to transfer. And so I wrote off to Harvard, and they sent me their very discouraging thing saying there's only about 2.5 people who are accepted, and it was a huge amount of forms, and then Haverford sent me this beautiful brochure and said, come, and so I filled out the forms, and they accepted me, and I went. And my mother said, you know that it's a Quaker school, and your grandfather actually went there. So I didn't know at the time. I didn't care about Quakerism. But the great thing about first of all, the wonderful thing about being a Quaker is you don't have to believe in God. So that's helpful. You can be an atheist Quaker. The other thing is that it has a timed release element. So I went to Quakerism. There's a kind of gentleness and an asking of questions rather than telling you what to do. They trust you with tests. And eventually, I think it had an effect on me. And the only Quaker meeting that I had been to until I went to this Dover one that's near me 30 years later was the last day at Haverford, on graduation day, I went to Quaker meeting, a beautiful meeting house, very simple. And all these parents stood up just spontaneously and said things and cried. It was so great. And I thought, my God, this is a Quaker meeting. This is just people saying things. It was a beautiful thing. And then it just sort of simmered there. So I guess the effect of Haverford, of course, I had a liberal education in the sense that I was forced to read things I didn't know about, Edmund Spencer, people like that, Marvel, and people I really like. And so I learned a lot from being told to read people I didn't know to read, but I also learned a lot from being shown that there was a way of thinking, a gentle way of thinking, that would eventually mean something to me. So yes.
One more question, sir. Please speak up. We can't hear you up here.
Would it be possible for you to give us an update on the issues you discussed in Double Fold? What's going on now?
Sure. So Double Fold is named, it's a book about libraries, and a mistake that big research libraries like the Library of Congress and the New York Public Library made. They decided that books were self-destructing, and that I think it was going to be something like 75 or 80% of the books by the year 2000 were going to have turned to dust. And they made this prediction in order to generate a lot of funding for microfilming. And they used this test called the double fold test. They folded the corners back and forth. And if the corner broke off, that meant that the book was doomed. Well, obviously, you don't need to fold a page, you just need to turn a page, right? So it's this terrible, scientifically unfounded test of a book, and it was false, and it was a way of making money. So I wrote this book about it. I ended up buying many tons of newspapers from Britain, and my wife and I got involved in being amateur librarians. The result of it is, I guess you could say, first of all, the newspapers that we ended up buying, which took up 3 tennis courts I guess it was about 50 tons of newspapers, bound, beautifully bound. Joseph Pulitzer's New York World. Do you know how rare that is? Much rarer than the Gutenberg Bible. All of the major libraries got rid of this thing. This is the most important publication in the history of American media. It was destroyed, okay, right and left. And yet we know about Pulitzer's name because of the Pulitzer Prize. So I wrote about all that. The newspapers themselves are now safely at the Rare Books department of Duke University. Meanwhile, I think libraries have gotten it to some degree. First of all, they're not microfilming as much but if you want to see something on the New York Times, for instance, if you want to look at the old New York Times, you look up an old article, you get that thing that looks pretty good, that's scanned from microfilm. Why is that? Because the New York Times doesn't own the printed New York Times. Can you believe that? No, but it's ridiculous. The newspapers completely dropped the ball. Libraries dropped the ball, and what we're looking at is scanned images of 35 millimeter microfilm. It's ridiculous. But now I think people think, gulp, we made a mistake, because there always is going to be new ways of taking pictures of things. If you go to a museum and you look at something on the wall, it's obviously beautiful. You go to the gift shop and you buy a postcard, that's interesting, but it's a picture, and you don't want to destroy the original because you have the picture. Yes? Do I feel like my book had a positive impact? In a tiny way, and I'll tell you the most stressful moment of my whole life was not the Colbert Report at all. It was the annual meeting of the American Library Association in, I think, 1992, maybe it was 1991. And there were 400 people there, and they all hated me because I had been critical of librarians. And I had to go on and explain that I am actually your friend. I'm actually trying to explain something that happened that is a terrible, wrong turn. And you're going to get it. and I showed pictures of what was in the newspapers, 4-color 1898, beautiful Joseph Pulitzer, 4-color stuff, the Sunday. You know, when Easter came around in Pulitzer's day, what he did was he actually printed Easter egg patterns, a full giant page of Easter egg patterns. Your kids were supposed to cut out the Easter egg pattern and then soak them with using the ink from the newspaper, soak them onto the page. So the paper was going to decorate your Easter eggs. I mean, this was an amazing paper, participatory paper. So I tried to make this point, and I was trembling and shitting myself and scared and everything, and they got it. And that was probably that was the scariest moment of my public life, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. If you have more questions, Nick is going to go down to the main floor and sign books. You can ask him a question as you buy his book. Have him sign it for you. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Alan, very much.